We're on to the final pathway of the Venus sequence, the pathway of realization, which connects the sphere of your SQ to the sphere of your core. And this is going very deep now into the golden path, and it gets kind of mystical and almost wordless. So I need you to open your mind and open your heart as I try to walk through and connect these dots for you. So the way that we get from the SQ to the core is through a process that is called absorption. And I'm going to talk more about that later on down the line. But if you have been viewing the golden path as a linear journey, meaning I can go from here to here, and then I go from here to here, and it's just a thing with time, and I spend time in each one, and then I move on to the next step, this is the place in the profile where that completely falls apart. There is no time between the spheres of SQ and the core. What separates them is this state of being known as absorption. And that state of being known as absorption is an energy field that's known as a Taurus. And if you're not familiar with a Taurus, essentially energy comes out the top and circles back in the bottom in 360 degrees. So it's like a donut shape, and we're able to feed on our own love. It begins to feed on itself. And before that happens, there are 3 stages of contemplation that we have to pass through. That first stage is mental contemplation. And what we have to deal with there is our belief systems. So this is logically, how do we see the world? How are we framing things? What are the stories that we're telling ourselves? The second piece is emotional. And this is tied directly to our suffering. So are we trying to avoid suffering? Do we have this longing to only feel the positive emotion in our life? Or have we realized that it's a pendulum, and on one side is what we would call a quote unquote negative emotion, and on the other side is its positive correlate. That's the same field. And so to feel the higher states, we have to get in touch with this suffering, and that is emotional contemplation. And then finally, we've got physical contemplation. And physical contemplation is about our DNA, where the gene keys get their namesake. It is deeper than our conscious awareness. This is in our unconscious, and it is literally shifting the molecules that are moving around in our body. And physical contemplation brings with it a sense of stability, a sense of knowing that the world is safe, and that you're safe in the world, and that you know who you are, or more importantly, you know what you are. And what starts to happen when we touch into physical contemplation is that our awareness no longer runs out into the world. It no longer casts itself out as blame or turns itself inward as a state of depression or shame or guilt. Again, those are different poles of the same energy frequency. And when you stop casting that awareness out, what starts to happen is that Taurus energy. We can begin to feed on our own love because we're able to keep our consciousness where it belongs, to us, instead of giving other people or other situations the power over how we respond to things and what choices we decide to make. Instead of deciding, the question that I always ask myself is, do I want to be right or do I want to be happy? And happy maybe isn't the right word for this scenario, but it's about staying home. It's about trusting in the world. And instead of responding in an energy that you know is going to take you further down the rabbit hole, we're able to let the universe redress the balance. And when that process starts to happen, you're no longer controlled by your ego. So our ego with physical contemplation starts to let go. However, unlike the cities where there is no ego, here we can still see the ego. However, we can make a conscious choice not to engage with it. So when we are lost in the cities, there is no more you, there is no more me, there is only this awareness that lies behind all of us. When you're in the gift frequency though, we can see both. We can see this egoic personality. And at the same time, we can see a different choice. We can see a different path. And you get to choose which of those paths you're going to take. And in choosing the universal energy time and time again, that is where we can begin that process of absorption. And what starts to happen is, on this pathway of realization, it is where evolution and involution meet. Involution is the divine grace, the God force reaching down to help draw us up, and evolution is our higher self reaching up for unity with that divine force. And where those forces meet are what is called the one point. And the one point sits behind our navel. And if you think about your umbilical cord, what is happening there? We go from nothing to receiving the energy and the nourishment that we need in order to grow and develop. And it happens right there at our belly button. And this is where the term navel gazing comes from. Right? The people back in the 60s and 70s used to make fun of the hippies, the meditators, as they were nasal gazing, thinking about this, or navel gazing, thinking about this one point. And this place calls to us and it waits for us to let go of the structures that the ego built to keep you safe. Coming before this sphere of the core. So on the other side, the pathway of realization, we've got the sphere of the core connected down to the sphere of SQ. And then we've got the EQ and the IQ. Forgive my writing here. And these three spheres all tie to the patterning that we took on, that we feel like we needed to keep ourselves safe. This for our physical body, this for our emotional body, and this for our mental body. But the one point is a narrow point. And the systems, the belief systems, if we go back to the mental, emotional, and physical contemplation, all of those systems that we put in place don't fit through this one point. And that means we have to let them go. We have to let go of those egoic systems because they are keeping us from returning to the universal energy that we are all seeking. Those structures are so cumbersome and there's so many attachments. Each time you try and fall into this universal love energy, you get sucked right back out by those egoic attachments. And in the womb, what's happening is we're going through 9 months of absorption in reverse. So we start in the womb as this pure universal energy. And gradually that energy gets sheathed in matter. And that is how we can interact in this universe, or in this world that we live in. We need the matter in order to engage with physical things. But we emerge from nothing. We emerge from the void, from the one point. And then we become matter. And what the process of absorption does is it returns us back to the state of energy that we had when we first entered the womb. It returns us back to unity with that universal energy. So if you know anything about the tarot, there's a card in the tarot known as the Fool. And the Fool is actually the first card in the deck. And at the same time, it's the last card in the deck. And the Fool that starts is a lot different from the Fool that comes back. And that is what I'm talking about here. When we first get started, we know nothing. And we gradually have to learn systems and beliefs and ways of being in the world. And that is the initial Fool. But when we return back to the womb, when we return back to the one point, again, we know nothing. But the nothing that we know now is very different from the nothing that we knew when we first came in. Now it is nothing with awareness. We're choosing nothing. And to reach our highest human potential, we have to go back where it all started. We have to take this path of the Fool to return to the beginning. An ending always leads to a beginning. But to get back to that place, we have to pass some really difficult inner tests. And these are tests that you're going to have to walk through as we come back to the sphere of the core, as you're walking this pathway of realization and returning yourself to the one point. And the test is known, or the tests are known, as the ring of trials in the gene keys. And in the gene keys, there are what are called codon rings. And there are actually 22 of those codon rings. And humans have 64 what are called codons in their DNA. And obviously there are 64 gene keys. So this is where the gene keys get their namesake. There's one gene key for each genetic codon that makes up human DNA. And when combined, when those codons are combined in various ways, we can make 20 different amino acids. So to give you an example here, let's say we have the genetic code CAA and then CAG. So genetic DNA comes in what are called triplets with these base pairs. Okay, so this is one triplet, this is a second triplet. This is one codon, this is a second codon. Now these two codons, CAA and CAG, when they are combined together, produce an amino acid called glutamine, which is one of the things that our body uses for muscle recovery and development. Now, when looked at the system of the gene keys, CAA and CAG are actually the 13th and the 30th gene key. And those two gene keys together, the 13th and the 30th, form the ring of purification. So in other words, what I'm saying here is The 20 amino acids are what lead us to knowing the codon rings. And that's how the gene keys are combined together to create these different rings. Each ring is a different amino acid. Now, I know you're thinking, wait, you said there are 22 codon rings and there's only 20 amino acids. What gives? Well, the 21st codon ring is the ring of trials. The 22nd codon ring, which I'm not going to talk about here in this particular video, is what's called the ring of secrets. And that actually pertains to one gene key and one gene key alone, and that is the 12th gene key. And we'll talk more about that here in a little. It's the only place in the gene keys where there is a ring within a ring. So the ring of trials tie to what are called the stop codons. And there are 3 stop codons in our DNA. And basically, the stop codons tell our DNA when a specific sequence of DNA is over. So going back to our CAA, CAG example here, the next 3 letters in the code might be UAA, and this is a stop codon. So in our genetic sequence, there's a translator basically, where the cells are reading the DNA and it's getting instructions on what to do next. And so the cell comes across CAA and then CAG. Now, it doesn't know at this point that it needs to stop and make glutamine. It needs another set of letters. In this case, UAA, known as a stop codon, and that means stop. This is the sequence that we're working on right now. Go and build that particular thing. And so those stop codons, basically, if we extrapolate that out, because remember, the universe is hologenetic in nature, meaning everything that happens inside of us is also happening external to us in the circumstances that are happening in our lives. And zooming out even farther, the things that are happening in our lives also have a correlate in the much larger universe. And zooming in even further, within each individual cell, within each individual set of electrons and protons and neutrons and quarks, there is another even smaller layer. That is what hologenetic means in this sense. So if we extrapolate it out, the stop codons represent points in our lives where we have pauses or breaks. And those pauses or breaks brought on by those stop codons are our opportunities to choose. We have a choice in each pause and each break. And that choice is fairly simple. Do you want to choose your ego, or do you want to choose your soul? The stop codons give us an opportunity to decide which road we want to walk. Do we want to stay in the physical realm, or do we want to start to walk the path of absorption and return back into the one point, back to that source of universal love? As our heart opens, it's very easy to get stuck at various points along the path. Because what starts to happen is the higher frequencies begin to pass through us in a more regular tempo, a more regular pace. And we don't want to let go of those higher frequencies, but even that needs to be let go of. If you're choosing to feel good, that means you're choosing your ego. We don't get to, there is no good or bad. That is duality. There only is. And so these ring of trials, these tests can be so subtle in nature sometimes. Because we realize we have to even give up the bliss that we've worked so hard to attain. So the first trial is the 33rd gene key. And it is the trial of remembering. This trial teaches us mindfulness. It teaches us not to get swept up in the outer world. The 33rd gene key is about remembering that you are a soul, that you come from a place that is not this physical reality. And when you remember that, it allows to see the world, the universe in a totally different frame. But it's so easy to forget. It's so easy to identify with the situations that happen in our lives, with the senses and what they're telling us to believe or what must be true because we feel a certain way. But all of that is part of the illusion. And the 33rd gene key is about remembering that illusion. And that is the first trial. The second trial, which I actually have twice in my gene keys profile, is the 56th trial of distraction. And this is distraction via the pleasure cycle and the pain cycle. And what that means is when we are in pain, we do anything we can not to face that pain. We distract ourselves away. And the way that we try and distract ourselves is through the illusion in the first place, with the opposite of the pain, which is pleasure. And then we get to that pleasure, but pleasure cannot last forever because it is a duality. And so then we swing back into the pain, and it's this constant running back and forth between the pleasure cycle and the pain cycle until we can realize that they are part of the same thing. We're doomed there forever. And there are many layers of distraction. There's such subtle distractions out there that you could think or mistake them for your soul's higher purpose. One of the most subtle distractions that exists is the need to help somebody else. But sometimes, and I'm not telling you not to help by any means, a lot of people need a lot of help. But only you can know when it's a distraction from yourself. Are you helping because the person needs help, or are you helping because you need to feel a different way? Because sometimes what people need is our disinterested love. They don't need our help. The universe is helping them. They need to learn the lesson. And so that's an example of a very subtle distraction as the second part of, or this second trial. And then finally, we've got our third and final trial as we walk back to the sphere of our core. And this is the trial of the 12th gene key, the trial of vanity, the trial of the self, of letting go of even that, losing who you are. We say to ourselves, I want to find my purpose. The gene keys are built on this. And again, there's nothing wrong with it. However, can you see it is the question. Because what's below that is what you have been searching for. It is not the vanity. It is not the finding your purpose or creating a loving relationship or finding prosperity and abundance in your life. None of those things are going to give you what you're seeking. If you had a life filled with purpose and love and prosperity, you still would not be where you want to go, because it is in the letting go of those things that allows us to return home, to fit through that one point by letting go of all these external structures. We've got to learn to lose ourselves. And there comes a point where we even need to let go of the cities. In a lot of Eastern traditions, in fact, I forgot a word here, there's what's known as the lure of the cities. And the cities are real things. The cities give you real special powers. If you watch the Marvel movies, you know about the cities. The 60th city, my gene key and my sphere of purpose, is what's known as a miracle key. And it governs the laws of gravity and the laws of time. And when that city dawns, you get to break those laws. So these are real things. However, where we need to be careful is that it is so easy to get swept up in that specialness, in that superpower. So even when you're that close to the end, when you've had these powers dawned on you, can you let go even that? You're so far in your evolution, but you're not all the way. And letting go of that specialness, letting go of that power is what gets us the last few steps. And that's why the Eastern traditions talk about the lure of the cities, because ultimately there's such a distraction, like a subtle distraction. And oftentimes the cities were seen as something negative because it keeps people from walking back through that one point and experiencing the true return to the universe. And so as we engage with that codon ring, the ring of trials, we're walking back to the point of our birth. We're walking back to where we came into this universe. And just as our five senses came online as we came into this world of being, so too must we learn how to seal our five senses to return to our true home. And in, again, a lot of esoteric traditions, the five senses are what is known as the five thieves. Sorry if I spelled that wrong. Because they are stealing our energy and our focus away from what's happening internally to us. And so we've got to seal these five senses so that we can shut off these five thieves, so that we can keep our experience inside of ourselves. And as we do that, we learn how to rewire our brain and therefore escape attachment to the outside world. So the last sense to develop, and therefore the first that we have to let go, is this sense of sight. And basically, what happens here is we stop seeing in words, right? There's a story in the Gene Keys where Richard talks about the difference between somebody who's left-brained and somebody who's right-brained seeing a sunset. And somebody who's right-brained is just taking it in. They're seeing the colors, they're seeing, but they're not naming it. They're not saying, oh, that's a nice deep orange, and look at that pink, and oh, feel that breeze. Whereas somebody who is left-brained is thinking about the sunset in words. And our job is to let go of those descriptors, let go of the stories that are tied to our sight, and to just see what is there, what is actually present, with no mental construct and no memory. Next up, we've got our hearing. That's the second, or the second to last sense to come online, and it happens in our second trimester. And basically, what happens is we begin to associate tone with emotion. And so when we hear a certain frequency, a certain vibration, our brain automatically associates that with a certain way of being. But as we travel back, we've got to learn to hear only frequency. We've got to let go of the stories of tone and what the associations mean in our minds. Then we get to smell. Smell is also developed in the second trimester. And unconsciously, we seek the sense of comfort that we get, that we had from the smell of our mother. And the rest of our lives, we go on trying to recreate that comfort, that smell that makes us feel safe. And smell, therefore, is about relationships. And there's so much happening in the world of smell that consciously we're not aware of. But if you know about pheromones, you know how much is happening in the world that we cannot see. And it's intimately connected to our intuition. It draws us towards things or repulses us away from something else. And we're drawn through our smell to the sense of what's familiar. Familiar people, familiar places, familiar foods. And instead, we have to let that go. We have to let go of the familiar. When we realize that we don't need security from the outside world because what is most familiar to us is behind that one point. And so it's no longer important to seek it in the outside world. Our fourth sense is the sense of taste, also developed in the second trimester. And we absorb sensation through our amniotic fluid when we're in the womb. In other words, what mom eats, we taste. And so this sense of taste, though, is deeper than just the physical sensation of taste. Taste is also about our sense of style, our taste of things in the world. What do we like and what do we dislike? Taste underpins also what we're drawn to, just like this sense of smell. What are our tastes in things? What draws my attention, or what do I immediately dislike? And as we march back, we can see through that belief that we are different, that there are different things to choose from in the first place. We can see that ultimately at our core, we're all the same thing. And that doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to lose your tastes. You're still going to have preferences towards things. However, you're going to know that it is a preference. You're going to know that it's not you. It's not who you are. It has nothing to do with who you are. It's just a part of this illusion that we've all agreed to be a part of. And then finally, we've got the sense of touch, which is the very first sense to come online. And it comes online at the end, as early as the end of our first trimester. And it is the first sense that allows us to know that we are separate from the world that we are in. Because if you are feeling something, then that means that something has to be external to you. Imagine the first time that you felt something. Try and put yourself back in that place. Up until that moment, there is just being. There is just you. And then all of a sudden, something acts on you. And so that very first experience of separateness comes about through that sense of touch. And touch is intimately linked to movement. Right? We can feel what our body is doing when we're moving through space. We have that kinesthetic awareness. And that's why when people attain this state of absorption and go back through the one point, it comes from a place of stillness. Because we need to shut down this sensation of touch. Stillness is what leads us down the pathway of realization. It's what allows us to merge back into the one. And so as we return along this pathway of realization and we approach the sphere of our core, we come in deep contact with what the sphere of the core represents, which is this sacred wound. There is a wound that we are born into this world with because we come into the world separate. And it is that separateness that calls to us our whole lives. It's what drives our seeking. It's what drives our striving and pushes us to grow and evolve. But what we eventually realize is that nothing that we do in this external world, nothing that we do in the land of the five senses can bring us back into unity, can get us back into true contact with that sacred wound. And this pathway of realization, wow, I know you can't read that, I'm sorry, is analogous to the pathway of core stability when we are walking the activation sequence. However, the pathway of realization is a much deeper core stability, because instead of in our activation sequence, this stability comes about, it's stability in our personality, it's stability in our ego. We recognize that we are not our ego, but nonetheless, we're still trying to balance out where we meet the external world. The core stability that the pathway of realization gives us is the stability of your soul, the stability of the universal love, stability of the one point. So this is a deep one, I know. I hope that that was helpful for you. This is really a tough one to describe in words because it is so deep and it goes back to before we began. And like I said, there is no time or road to get here. Nonetheless, I hope it was helpful. I want to invite you, as usual, to our wisdom calls. I'm going to be doing them on Thursdays at noon for the foreseeable future. So I'm posting this video on a Tuesday. We won't have one this week, which is Thursday the 8th, but I will have one the following Thursday, which 8 plus 7 is 15. So I have to assume it's Thursday the 15th at noon. And then we're going to do them each Thursday, at least for the next little bit. We're going to try once a week. We'll see how that goes and possibly stay there, possibly switch to every other week. Just depends on what people are finding valuable. I realize that there's a lot going on in this world and there's a lot that you feel called to do and see, and I don't want to hog your time or attention. And I want you to have an opportunity to talk about this stuff, because to have a place where people can see and understand what you're doing is a truly special thing. So I hope you'll join us at one of our next wisdom calls. Thank you guys for being here. Until next time.